Hi, good morning. Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. This is my first time here. It's really exciting for me to be in this building. It's one of my favorite buildings in the city. I used to hang out here a lot in high school because I was cool. So it's nice to come full circle and be standing in this room here with you all. My name is Evan Saskin. I'm the president of Blue Lion Building Corporation, and I'm an architect, I guess first and foremost. But since 2011, I've also been running a construction company, which also grew into a development company focused on small-scale, multi-unit, urban infill housing. It was a pretty esoteric niche when we first found our way into it, but as you can see, it's gaining a lot of traction and popularity, and part of that is a change in cultural appetite for that kind of housing, and part of it is driven by policy shifts that are still ongoing today. All of our projects primarily share in like three common criteria, and the first is that they're always small in scale. We're looking at 2, 3, 4 unit projects with like 1,000 to 3,000 square feet behind each front door. And that really allows us to get them easily approved, easily financed, easily designed and built, relatively speaking. And importantly, like a small scale development like that has always allowed us to focus on meticulous craft and unique layouts to everyone so that they really feel like one-off houses. The second kind of common criteria between all of our projects is that they've existed like exclusively in urban infill sites, pretty much in Toronto's core, moving into the West End. And that has really allowed us to like take advantage of existing urban infrastructure and servicing while creating more housing on like underutilized sites where everything exists to already support them, yeah? In terms of land acquisition, over the past decade of just like stratospherically rising land costs, we've always managed to buy land non-competitively because we rely on seeing potential in sites that other people don't see. And then the third, and maybe the most important common criteria, is a really uncompromising attitude in terms of design and construction quality, yeah? And so when it comes to like replicating building designs, and I'm looking to see if anyone from my own team has made it here yet, because they'll be groaning at this, we insist on every site is unique, and so there isn't like any broadly replicatable one-size-fits-all solution. We're starting from scratch every time, and that results in housing that feels like a custom house, yeah? So we're forever experimenting with new materials and building systems and layout organizations and site planning and relying really on those like classical Vitruvian ideals of like strength and stability and beauty and utility to inform all of our decision-making processes. So I guess that's how the architect hat never comes off. I graduated in 2006 from University of Toronto with a master's degree in architecture, and pretty quickly afterwards worked for a high-end custom home firm in the UK, and shifted after that to like a larger condominium firm here in Toronto. And like 15, 20 years ago, those two worlds are very, very dismissive of each other. One thinks that one is brainless, the other thinks the other is like soulless. And I thought that there's an actual meaningful meeting of both ideals. So when I got my license, I wanted to find a way to forge like good quality housing for profit. And that's driven everything that we've done since. I'm not the first person to have that realization. I'm not the first person to have that realization with regard to multi-unit housing. But when we started doing this in 2011 and 12, it felt like we were the first people doing it with multi-unit housing in Toronto. So it was clear early on that in order to maintain the qualities that we wanted, we needed to control the construction process in its entirety. And in order to control the construction process in its entirety, we needed to control the financing process in its entirety. So we really became developers in order to protect and deliver those design ideals. The next piece of that puzzle, we built a house, we fixed it up, we made a little bit of money, and in 2011 we had this insight in how to maximize the potential of like a very typical infill, retail scale neighborhood lot. We knew we wanted to get multiple front doors on these infill streets, and we didn't want to split them down the middle because the lots are very skinny to start with already. And we didn't want to split them with one unit over the other, which I know is very common in a lot of multiplexes. But the 2013 bylaw was structured in such a way that they only needed to be partially above and below each other, the units, in order to be considered multiplexes. And we've really pushed that to a pretty extreme, where we have no main living space in a unit above or below any other living space in another unit. And that achieves something that feels very much like a house, but many of them on a single lot, yeah? The next part of the puzzle, I should say on that, there's like an inefficiency to that I think a lot of development professionals in particular balk at. When you're bringing, 3 distinct front doors, there's no common element interior space. There's individual circulation for every house. The structure is actually really straightforward, but everything else about it, there's a lot of redundancy, and we've come to really embrace that as the key architectural challenge of this kind of work, because that inefficiency delivers units that feel like conventional houses. Yeah? So then the next piece of that puzzle was figuring out how to sell each unit to actual end users instead of just to sort of single large landlord entities. And from my high-rise experience, I knew about the power of the condominium registration process. Condo Act in Ontario is like 1984, 86. It's about 40 years old at this point. And it's a bit of a dirty word. Like, I think high-rise residential and condominiums have always been very synonymous in Toronto. And so we found that we were pushing up against, when we say condo, people think like glass tower, shitty envelope, greedy developer, petty board, money laundering, leaky, underfunded reserve. Like, there's just a lot of negative baggage with the term. And so, well, to combat that, we've had to scrape through our condo docs to make them as much like a house as they can be, as if it were a semi-detached house, and you and your neighbor have some very minor collective responsibilities in order to maintain, municipal infrastructure that services you both. But everything that you would think of as your house, your roof, your windows, your foundations, is yours. And that was a real pivot away from conventional condominium understanding. And as we've seen, these are a bunch of buildings that we've built in sort of schematic graphics. As we've seen each unit in these trade hands multiple times, it seems that there's been a very consistent uptake in the market. There are always some people for whom living in a condo is like a deal breaker. But for everyone else, it feels like a house, and that's really been enough. Talk about worst case scenarios in the Q&A. So then there was an important financial point that fell out of that, which is that, like most development models, rely on assumptions about dollars per square foot on the build side and on the sale side. And I have found these models to be very stubbornly resistant to forecasting end prices on a dollar per square foot basis. And what we find instead is that they trade at like 10% less than or the same as houses of the same age and amenity in geographic proximity. So that's been like a very important step up. And it makes sense, because when you buy a house, like a normal house on a lot in a street in the city, part of the money that you're paying is for the house itself, and part of it's for the land. And by constructing multiple units in this fashion, you're selling all of the house square footage, as you always would, but you're selling the land multiple times. And that's, everything's kind of fallen out of that. There's a diminishing return problem. As you start to get more and more and more units on a site, it starts to feel less and less and less like your land under your house. And so we find there's a real sweet spot in 2, 3, 4 plus something in the rear. But like every day of the week, and there's enormous inefficiency here, which clearly I'm the kind of person who embraces. We would rather do 10 different 4-unit projects over one single 40-unit project. So that's the essence of our development thesis. Like, find lots where we can resell the land a few times, design the units to feel house-like, over-deliver on design and construction quality, and repeat. Our approach, yeah, it's not without its challenges, from navigating this sort of complex approvals framework, which is constantly shifting in the past decade, managing condominium corporations until they can kind of take off and be self-managed. Like, let's just say the road to success has not been smooth, nor is it over. But within these massive regulatory shifts, I think the next decade is going to bring this model to every corner of the city. And I think the way it happens is for dozens and dozens and dozens of other small-scale developers like us to put their own spin on it and deploy it broadly. So, thanks very much for letting me be here today, and look forward to the Q&A and meeting you out here.